Hey y'all, we did it. We played a Berserk D&D and it worked. And yeah, the players really seemed to like it. I liked it. I hope that a lot of viewers liked it as well. Thank you so much for watching the recaps. If you didn't watch the recaps, that's okay because a lot of y'all watched the session zero. So I want to do a quick rundown of what happened before I go into kind of a self review of how I think the campaign went and maybe a few things that I learned. So that recap. A party of mercenaries in the Band of the Hawk forms: the tactician archer Milos, the stalwart swordsman Steel, the cocky entertainer Mirka, and the quiet monk Ambrose. And they succeed on missions, infiltrating dangerous locations, and slaying prime targets for Griffith. When they come face to face with their greatest trial, Nosferatu Zod, Mirka seems to be slain, but instead the mysterious token around his neck, a bayolet, transports the party to a strange interstice of the normal world and somewhere far stranger and more frightening. There, at this eclipse, Mirka makes a sacrifice for power, as many a fellow mercenary falls to his whims. Ambrose, Milos, Steele, and Griffith make it out, but Steele decides to leave the crew because Griffith also carries a bayonet and may one day perform a similar sacrifice at a similar eclipse. As the crew completes more missions and together kill more high standing nobles and generals, they pick up the magician Aurora, who unknowingly harbors the evil spirit Umbra. And after handily winning the Battle of Doldry thanks to the infiltrators' plans, Griffith decides to give up his bayonet to Milosh, but Umbra completes his secret mission to guide Griffith back on the path towards the eclipse, with Mirka giving Griffith back the bayonet. In the end, Mirka fully turns against the party, but they manage to survive and convince Griffith to stay on a more good aligned path and reject the call of the eclipse. So that is where we were as far as the story that we told with the Band of the Hawk or the Golden Age. And changes happened, as you can see, and that's good. I didn't want to start this to say you are all Guts stand ins. You are all going to play out the story of Guts no matter what the dice say. I wanted everyone to have kind of that agency, and that's a little more of what I want to talk about now. So we have this, or really on me as the DM, I have this pressure of the story of the Golden Age arc in Berserk versus the story of player agency. The Golden Age arc is a legendary work of storytelling. However, I believe personally that the story of the players and what they decide to do is the most important thing about a D&D adventure. So I really had to try to find the balance there. And at first I thought like, oh, this is such a unique challenge that I am facing, but in reality, it's I think something faced by any DM who is trying to go off of, Curse of Strahd, a book adventure, while trying to allow their players to have fun. It's a, you know, railroad versus sandbox. And I don't think railroad or sandbox are bad words. I think it's bad to have too tight of a railroad, and I think it's bad to have too open of a sandbox to where there's no like quests afoot. Um, and I think we struck that balance well. There were a lot of little points where okay, we're going to have the battle for Doldry. What is that going to look like? And but what it wound up looking like was the party as their characters, the infiltration squad, really set up well. We have a Dawn. We want to create this situation where we draw out General Boscone and uh, Governor Genin to, out of the field of battle so that we can kill them, and then the squad, the Band of the Hawk, will be able to swoop in and do what they do at Doldry. Um, so I want to say that I struck a very good balance there between the story and the player agency, the railroad and the sandbox. What was harder was playing Griffith was probably the biggest challenge for me because in rereading uh, the Golden Age arc or parts of it to really get into what drives this man, can I feel fresh? Can I pull a few quotes? You discover how Griffith is really driving the story and the tactics along. Um, So, how do you play off this man and still allow the players to feel like they're the ones that are making the decisions? And it often, there were a couple of funny times where one of the players in character would be like, Griffith, say something. And I'm like, okay, I've been avoiding saying something so that they can talk through this elaborate assassination plan. Now it's time for me as Griffith to say, well, what if we use this kind of antitoxin? Or, what if the ultimate goal is taking Doldry? Don't forget, what if we use me as bait to try to incorporate those story elements? And it worked almost like, the player saying, okay, we need a hint here, Jackson, and me saying, okay, well, I don't have to provide the hint because Berserk and Griffith have already provided the hint, so let me just read that verbatim. And that really worked out. I think there was, for me and for the players, most of them anyway, a desire for change, a desire to tell our own tale. And I think the more we played with each other, the more that was understood. Right off the bat, one player's decision to ask, can I start the game with a Bailet? Was a big deal. And I deliberated on that. And at first, I was going to say, like, no, this is way too much power to give to one player and not the other three. But the other three players were like, no, we're okay with that. And that made me confident enough to say, okay, let's see where that goes. And if you followed along with the recaps, you'll see how much Mirka was really shaping the story. But the other three players were not left out because they also were responding to Mirka, treating him as sometimes a friend and sometimes a foe. And that led to the decisions of how they approached their missions and how they approached Griffith. I had a question about the ending when it happened, and I think that the ending came at just the right time. In game, the crew had managed to avoid Griffith's eclipse. And, metagame, that was kind of the whole lead up to the Golden Age arc is the eclipse and what happens there. And once we avoided it, I think the rest of the Band of the Hawk story is not as interesting. They're out in the world. Griffith is gonna keep on this good path. They're gonna try to do good deeds and make a kingdom up. And that is, might be fun and interesting to play out, but I don't think that it is the most fun and interesting compared to everything else that we've been through in the Golden Age. So I think, in a way, the test was already completed. And IRL, on that side of things, I was feeling that the game was running its course, and there was at least one player expressing that it was time to wrap things up for reasons I won't mention. But real life happens, and honestly, 4 months is a solid amount of time for a D&D campaign to run. So I think we had a very good run, and we ended it at the right time. It's kind of that classic TV showrunner question of, well, do we keep going because the studio has given us more money and we can keep going even if we're running out of ideas, or do we say, here's our conclusion, this is where we're stopping it? And we went with the latter. Let's talk about combat a little bit. Overall, all of the like house rules that we had, I think, worked very well. I think it made for not only a feel that was very berserk, but I think a feel that set apart from normal D&D, and we really didn't do anything that far outside of the core rule books. The one thing that was outside there was a UA, and that was armor as damage reduction. And let me just say that was a game changer. This was one of the core things that I really wanted to push for and try out, and everyone was game. But it did make picking monsters more difficult, adjusting ACs, and then adding in that damage reduction did make every combat just a little bit slower. But I think that added crunch and that added feel where every sword swing matters, at least at lower levels, because once we got up to higher levels and things have 100 HP, it really just means, again, that combat is slower, because rather than me consistently doing 10 damage, 10 damage, 10 damage to the monster, I'm doing 6 damage, 6 damage, 6 damage, and that's going to make a difference. It also means that the paladin with great weapon master and the fighter with sharpshooter their damage mattered more than the warlock swinging their Arumi and the monk. When you're constantly dealing out 6 damage, 6 damage, 6 damage, but that is getting reduced, and now suddenly it's 2 damage, 2 damage, 2 damage, versus my 20 or 30 damage strike is getting cut down to 22. Yeah, those feats really mattered, and I think I would give different advice to people coming into using that rule again if I use that rule again. I did enjoy it, but I think it works better at lower levels, and there's certainly a different meta that comes up. Uh, this crew of players is very tactically minded and extremely proficient, so I had to up my game, and I had to do it without being unfair. And I think I accomplished that. I'll say there were some fights that were meant to be unfair. Like Nosferatu Zod is a monster that is not meant to be defeated. And I think everyone knew that out of game. And we played it out in such a way where their characters could reasonably understand, oh, we're not going to beat this dude. The objective has changed. We need to flee from this fight, or we need to find an alternate win condition. So that worked very well. I think I set up the fights pretty darn good. There were just a couple where, okay, you're fighting some average two-door troops, and I was using different hobgoblin stats, and I think we could have used maybe one less of those fights because they did drag on a little bit by the time it was the second or third one. That was maybe the one space where I could have adjusted my combat to be better. Uh, Almost every fight had a secondary objective beyond deplete all enemy hit points. There was somebody to capture. There was somebody to save, like Casca is on the edge of a ravine and she's about to fall over. Are you going to save her? Yes, you are. Um, so I thought that was a good thing that I always give advice to new DMs on, that I was able to follow through on here. The last fight in the finale was truly a challenge that the players mentioned, that it really came down to 3 human adventurers facing 3 overpowered apostles. And the fact that the 3 humans didn't all die I think I got to give myself some credit on. And to be fair too, one of those apostles was Merca, who was a player character going in full PvP mode, and there was quite a bit of PvP if you listened in on the recap. And I don't think it ever came down to like, well, I'm gonna kill your character, but it easily could have happened. Those were probably the most frustrating moments for me, or the most challenging moments, because as a DM, I have to sit back and adjudicate the rules and just kind of hope and trust that things go well, even though they were not going according to any plan that I had. And you just in those moments have to kind of breathe and ask yourself, are all of my players having fun? Because if they're not having fun, this PvP needs to stop. But these guys, I think, all trusted each other more than maybe I thought they might. So that's where that stress was coming from, was all of my experiences of bad PvP. These guys were just above and beyond. So I had to remind myself that I could breathe in those moments. And that final fight ended in a stalemate and a big diplomacy fight where we're throwing deception and persuasions at each other rather than throwing hands and throwing swords. So I really, really like that. I think that the combat was top tier, but I think we stuck true to the spirit of Berserk, that not only can we have some top tier gory fights, but the emotion and the reasons why we're fighting is what makes the drama and the story interesting. Quickly talking about prep, boy, I was glad that this was on Roll20. That made my prep, map making, monster grabbing so much easier, so much quicker, to where I think the majority of my prep time was spent rereading Berserk and writing up recaps, which I honestly count amongst prep, because being able to write up, okay, here's what happened last session, gets me in the mindset of what should happen next session. Um, I found that my custom monsters performed better than my pre-made reskins. Kind of when I started Berserk D&D as a concept, I knew that, like, oh, I can take a knoll and I'll just reskin that with a token of like a Midland soldier and maybe give them a few extra weapons and use that, and that's a quick and easy way for me to move forward with these designs, rather than saying I'm going to make a custom Midland soldier, I'm going to make a custom two-door knight and a custom two-door commander. Um, but while some of those worked at lower levels, once we started getting into higher levels where we could see how all these uh, variant rules we were using, especially armor as damage reduction, worked, the times when I went ahead and said, okay, I am going to make Wild exactly how Wild should be. I am going to make Griffith a friendly NPC companion exactly how he should be. Those were the ones that really paid off. So I think I could benefit from spending a little more time homebrewing when I can, because once I got the flow of these fights, I was able to make monsters that played into those fights better, rather than trying to shoehorn in existing monster manual monsters and hoping that they play out. I am very grateful to Merca's player, who helped me define the Bailet and the Apostle forms. We had a really good private message thread going back and forth with ideas about, okay, we know what the Bailet is in Berserk. How do we define that as a D&D magic item? And we really wound up with something good and juicy there that was also mechanically sound and not too overpowered. The apostle form was overpowered, but that is by design and that is sticking with the lore. The apostle should be able to take on multiple human combatants without much trouble at all. And I think that worked out in a way where nobody got clobbered by a apostle, except for Mirka getting clobbered by Zod because he was asking for it. Um, Also very grateful to the players who messaged me their internal schemes and their character journals between games, because that was a major boon for my prep of making a more player guided adventure. I think that's a big lesson learned there. If you're going to have a player guided adventure where you want the input of player decisions laying down those rails rather than you laying down those rails, you can't just rely on your improv in the moment. You're going to have to talk a lot more to your players in between games, and my players were very willing to do that, so it played out well. Something else I wanted to share was that about 3 sessions in, I think, I shared this little slider board with the crew and said, hey, in the meantime, before we go to next session, take a little anonymous person head and move it over. Do you want easier fights or tougher fights? Do you want more social RP or more combat? And this was kind of the results. So I had 3 people out of 4 that said they wanted tougher fights. I think I definitely made the fights tougher after that. 4 people that said they wanted more social RP, which is an interesting combination to say we want tougher fights, but we do want more social interactions. And I think we actually met that. There was a lot more scheming, but when we had fights, they were tougher and they were more consequential, and that's good. So that was really good feedback for me. They didn't care about gold, but they wanted more items. It was a challenge to make. It's super easy to just look at the DMG list of magic items or homebrew magic items for your players. It's hard to do that in a low magic setting like Berserk. So that pushed me a little bit to make some creative items. Milosh's player had this idea to, like, I want to basically invent the repeating crossbow. So we did some fun with that there. That was good. Not so much opinions on should we have more like just chat, out of game chat during session or out of game chat on the interim. I asked if we wanted more solo breakouts where you kind of see on Critical Role where it's like, okay, and now we're going off to a scene for Milos, and now we're going off to a scene for Ambrose, which I leaned on kind of a lot earlier in the game, but they said we actually want more teamwork, which was funny because we did move towards more teamwork, but at the same time, you have Merca and Umbra having their own schemes that are apart from the party. But I think overall we did have more teamwork. And then we had a separate slider for saying we want more main content and less like random encounters, which was kind of a relief for me to hear because I don't like random encounters. And something like Berserk, I think you can easily have fun with saying, how many just random goon fights does Guts have? That's still something fun in the story for him to do in between, developing his relationship with Casca or whatever. But hearing that we don't want the random goon fights, we want stuff that's important, that matters, that drives the plot along. Okay, let's do that. So that was all good feedback. Yeah, as far as overall thoughts about how things went, the players had a lot of praise and seemed to have a great time. I think we did phenomenally well for a group of internet randos. The only real stress point was honestly something like from me where I was getting frustrated and had to say, "Hey guys, I need you to back off a little bit on the like metagame tactical chat." And I usually encourage that. It was just that these guys are very tactically minded, so it got to the point where like every turn they're listing, here's the 5 different things that my player could do, and it was just really bogging down fight. So I said, hey guys, can we take that from a 10 to like an 8 or a 9? And they were instantly like, oh yeah, dude, sorry about that. So it was quickly and maturely resolved. We're at like the 20-minute mark on this video. So look, I would run this campaign again, with different characters, with different outcomes. Absolutely. I would run with a random internet crew. Again, this is honestly my first foray into that realm. And yeah, I would try it again. The bar is set pretty high, I got to say, with this group of dudes, but I would try it again. Uh, I would still run 5th edition D&D in Berserk. This was a big question. This was a frequent comment that I got both just in my friend circles and online on YouTube was why don't you try running Warhammer or Symbaroum or something? And it's like, I got more resources in 5e. I think I know the variant rules I want that can do this, and I think that wound up being the right call. I think we ran a really good game that played into D&D tropes while still being true to Berserk, and I would absolutely do that again. Um, and I would maybe do further Berserk D&D arcs. I had a few pitches at the start of, do you want to start as Gambino's Mercs? Do you want to start as Band of the Hawk? Do you want to start as the Holy Iron Chain Knights? Do you want to start on Fantasia? And those last two, those are still things that could happen, whether it follows this timeline or rather more likely, as I got advised from one of my players, have the eclipse as a fixed point that does happen. Femto is real, Griffith is gone. What does the Holy Iron Chain Knights group do? This was a wonderful experiment. I appreciate all the views and the interaction that I got on YouTube. And thank you for listening to me ramble. I am interested in your thoughts and questions down below. Thank you to my awesome players. Have a Nat 20 day. Bye bye.